All right, good evening. I'm going to try to stand in the light occasionally so you can actually see what I look like. Hopefully the light's not coming off my bald spot too much, but I am going to be walking around, so hopefully you don't get, your head, neck sore. I'm going to try not to. I'm told if I stand in front of the speakers, it's going to create some serious feedback, so I apologize in advance because as I'm talking, I might absentmindedly go in that direction. My name is Jeffrey Burt. I'm Assistant Superintendent for Curriculum, Instruction, and Assessment. And I do want to welcome you, and I do want to thank you. It is important that we have parent involvement, and it is very important that you come out tonight to find out this information about the Common Core, about our new assessment associated with the Common Core. It is important, and it's important for you, it's important for our district, it's important for the state, for the country, and most importantly, important for your children. And as a side note, I do want to point out that I'm not just a district administrator. I am a parent of 4 children that are of school age, and 3 of them, as a matter of fact, are of testing age. So this is something that's important for me as a parent as well, because my children are going through this process of change as well. And there's been a lot of debate in my town as well about this process. So again, I want to thank you for coming out. I just want to briefly talk about some terms because in the education world we slip into a lot of acronyms, so I want you to be familiar. So if I do say things like SBAC, you know what those mean. So real quick, Common Core State Standards, sometimes called the Common Core, CCSS. So if you see that reference, that's what it means. Smarter Balance Assessment Consortium, that is what we're referring to for the actual assessment associated with the Common Core. Framework, that is what Connecticut calls its standards. For instance, they're currently working on the social studies framework. They've been working on that for about 10 years. Full disclosure, I'm a former history teacher, so if I get into a lecturing mode, I apologize. English Language Arts, we refer to that as ELA. Your English classes in high school, we still refer to them as ELA. And finally, one of the strands we'll be talking about is science, technology, engineering, and math, or STEM. Okay? So what I'd like to do is provide you with an overview for the evening of what we're going to try to accomplish tonight, what I'm going to try to accomplish tonight, what the purpose of the meeting is, and what it is not. First of all, this meeting is about information. It's very important to get this information out to you. I'm going to try to do my best to provide you. I don't want to spend 3 hours trying to do that. There's plenty of information out there online, but I'm going to do my best to give you the broad overview of the changes that are taking place from what we used to have to what we have now. Well, it's not a sales pitch. I'm not trying to get you to convince you to accept the Common Core or convince you to accept the SBAC. Again, it's for your information. What it is, we're going to be talking about the standards a lot. We're going to be talking about the tests. You're going to find out what those look like, what does it mean, how we transition from one year to the next, or from one set of standards to the next. What it's not a discussion about the implementation. That is one of the biggest issues that you'll hear about. One of the biggest issues, as a matter of fact, I believe the commissioner and the governor just put together a coalition to try to take a look at the implementation of both of these items. Just announced that last night. There was an issue on the Hill today there's a law coming through about stopping the Common Core, and again, a lot of that has to do with the implementation. And we're hearing that nationally as well, a lot of issues with implementation. Again, I'm not there to defend the implementation or really say negative things about it. If you would like to discuss that at some point, I am available for coffee. I can come to PTO meetings, I can come to school meetings, I can come to book clubs, whatever you'd like. We have other staff members that are also open to those discussions, so I'm definitely open to talking about that, just not the purpose tonight. We are going to tell you what our position is on both of these items, because that's only right for you to understand that. What we're not going to get into is a policy debate, because we do not have local control over state legislating saying that we are moving to these standards and that we are assessing kids. And we're not going to get into the policy debate of why the states took on the Common Core. There was some leverage applied from the federal government in terms of funding. So that's not the purpose of this evening. And again, I'm perfectly willing to talk about that, but it's not about this evening. And finally, it's an opportunity for you to ask questions. At the end of the evening, or end of my presentation, over here and over this to my right are 2 microphones. So if you do have questions, you can line up along the side, and we'll do our best to answer them. I'm going to ask some of my colleagues to come up at the end of the evening to help me with those questions. Okay? So again, going back to one of my points, it's about information. I'm not trying to sell you anything. What I do want you to do, what we're going to ask our 8th grade students to do, is to gather evidence, is to research, is to look at different resources, and then form your own opinion. So that's what we ask our 8th grade students, so that's what I ask you to do tonight, and that's my purpose tonight, is again to try to provide you with some information. Also, there's a quick handout up there that shows some pros and some cons to the Common Core. It is from a group called, I believe it's Parents for Public Education. It actually is a group out of Jackson, Mississippi. And it's now, they're trying to gain national stronghold across the nation. They're now in Texas, I think, in California, so they're starting to gain momentum. So just a quick 2-page, I have to thank Brenda Green for that. She did find that for me, so thank you for that. So the overview for the evening, to be more specific, in terms of the Common Core, I'm going to go a little bit into the background of the Connecticut standards, where we were, because we need to know where we were to know where we're going. We're going to talk about the move to national standards, why did that happen. I'm not going to go into great detail about the development of that. You know, who was involved, you know, what parties were involved, what teachers were involved, you know, et cetera. That's all available again online, or we can have another conversation about that. Again, I want to get to the substantive part of our presentation. And realistically, the most important part for me is how are the Common Core being used here in Vernon. And I think that's probably one of the most important things for you as well. And finally, what is our position on the Common Core? Next, we're going to get into the SBAC. Again, that was one of our terms. That is the assessment and background of that. Where were we in terms of Connecticut assessments? What is SBAC? Give you some examples, and we're going to compare examples of the CMT with the new SBAC assessments. And then finally, again, what is our position on those new assessments? So a little bit of history of the Connecticut standards. They were developed early on in the 90s and really came on as an important initiative for the state, mostly due, if you recall, back in 2001, the passage of No Child Left Behind. And for those of you who don't remember that, that was a legislation trying to say that all students, that was 100% of students, will meet proficiency by, who remembers the year? It was this year. It was 2014. And with No Child Left Behind, there was a lot of penalties associated with not making progress. One of the things we have is something called adequate yearly progress. I actually was an assistant principal in a school that did not make that progress. And we had to jump through a lot of hoops, and we were threatening of being reconstituted. There was a number of things associated with that. So you got to remember that we have had standards. But the problem with that No Child Left Behind just said, develop standards locally. So you can see back in 2005, we had some original set of standards. We revised them again in 2009 for the ELA and for language arts standards. We had those revised in 2006 and most recently 2009. That's when we started hearing about the Common Core. So you can see there was an impetus for us to develop standards. And why do we want standards? Standards are good because it tells us what we want across the state, what we want students to know and be able to do. And that helps guide us. And I'll get a little bit more into detail of what that means when we get into a few more slides. You don't have to read all this, but this is the opening paragraphs for both of those documents for ELA, I think 2005, 2006, and for math. And you can see that they bolded and underlined. I did that specifically. That wasn't original to the document. I did that because it said even back then, 2005, 2006, this was an attempt to say that we're now trying to align nationally. It was people writing these, there was teachers involved, administrators involved, university members involved in writing these things, and they're going, we need some guidance for this. We need to reach out to other groups to say, what is it that is important in our education? The difficulty with writing standards is that you can write a lot of them. Because you got a group of people in a room, a committee, they all have their own specialty. You start writing lots of standards. So when you have too many standards, then you start looking for someone else to help guidance. And what essentially are standards? Again, it's setting that benchmark. And Connecticut set their own benchmark because we were required by No Child Left Behind to set those benchmarks, essentially raise the pole, raise the bar. And then we have an assessment to see if students meet those standards. Well, it turns out when you look a little bit closer, You look at Connecticut standards, and then you look at other state standards, that's not an equal level playing field. We had, in Connecticut, in general, if we look at, well, there's a way to benchmark them, in general, we were about top 10 in the country in terms of the rigor of our standards. Among the top are typically Massachusetts and South Carolina. Among the bottom would be Tennessee. So what does that mean for a student? If I'm a student in Tennessee, and I take I'm being taught by a teacher that is teaching to this standard, and then I'm assessed by that standard, they could be the standard could be 3 times as low as Connecticut standard. So in other words, I could pass their standard, I could pass their test in Tennessee, move to Connecticut, and be in a remedial reading, because it's 3 times below the level of Connecticut. So that was the impetus. All of a sudden we started looking at these different things. We started determining, wait a second, if we're all saying we all need to have standards and they're a good thing, and we needed to figure out where kids are by using assessment, but we don't have an even playing field, then the governors of the states said we need to create a level playing field. And that is the basis of the Common Core. Again, I'm not going to get into great detail of development. There's a lot of information out there, both pro and con, on that topic, but at least you get some sense of what brought us to that level. Excuse me, I am fighting a cold here. So what are the standards? Because we hear about the Common Core, like the Common Core coming. Well, again, we've had standards for over a decade. And what does that mean? On the left-hand side, your left-hand side, this is 3rd grade reading standard. Okay? On the right-hand side is the Common Core 3rd grade reading standard. And you can see there's a couple pieces that are very similar. Main idea of text. Okay, well, what's the big deal then? What we know about the Common Core is that they add to that. They up the rigor for our students. So you can see here that it's not just determine the main idea and recall that. You actually have to understand the main idea, and you have to understand the supporting details and correctly relate them to the main idea. And that's a good thing to do. You can't just say, well, the main idea is this. Well, tell us a little bit more about that. Why is that? Why do you think that's the main idea? What evidence in your book helps us understand that? So it's a good thing. 6th grade math, same thing, very complicated. I wouldn't recommend reading these too closely. It gave me a little bit of a headache. But you can see similar things, and the basis of these standards is you're familiar with the area of a rectangle. Okay, it's base time height. They'll give you, if it's a 2x4 rectangle, it's 2 times 4, it's 8, whatever those units are. So that's basically the same. You use something familiar to try to deconstruct something else. Okay? So very similar, different wording, but then what happens? So now we're going to not just do that, but we're going to increase this standard to say you're now going to apply that to real-world situations. Okay? We know that's good. Kids like that when you do that. Kids like it when you say, okay, well now let's go look at the playground. Let's go look at something on the playground. Let's take a look at your notebook. Let's take a look at the lunch tray. Whatever it is, kids are engaged by that material, what we do in the real world. So you can see that there's a lot of courses. I only chose 2. There was a number, I was going through these. There are a number that have direct correlation. Some cases it was the next grade up. Some cases it was a slight tweak. Some cases it was 1 for 1. So again, we had standards. We're just moving to a new set of standards. And we're going to explain for a minute why those are good. So how are they used? How are they used here in Vernon? Well, specifically, they're a set of skills. Okay? They do not dictate our content. They do not tell us exactly what to teach. It's a set of skills we're trying to attain. Okay? That's very important. And so what does that mean for our teachers? What does that mean for us here in Vernon? What that means is we still control our curriculum. Matter of fact, we just had a full day release day a couple weeks ago. As you know, your children were home. And we spent a lot of time then taking a look at our current status of our curriculum. And these were teachers. Teachers taking a look at it, taking the status, and determining what we need to do to ensure that we have a fully articulated curriculum, K through 12, in all areas. And that's all done with teachers. Now, they use the standard as guidelines, but they still develop it locally. Okay? So they are interpreted by the teachers. So it's not just stamp it on the board and then I'm going to teach it. Our teachers are experts, and we count on them to take the information in those standards, look at it, collaborate with each other, and determine, okay, what are the instructional techniques that help us reach those standards? It's not a one-to-one. We're not purchasing a program. Okay, that's one of the things I've heard. Well, you're going to have to go out and buy something. Well, no, I'll give you an example. In K through 5, we have something called Reader's Writer's Workshop. And it's all based on books, just books you buy. Recently it was Dr. Seuss's birthday. They were reading Dr. Seuss books. Now that's not in the Common Core. It doesn't say use these books. Okay? But it does tell you this is what standards should be for reading for grade 3. And you can, that's whatever material you want. So what are we going to be doing this summer with some of our Alliance Grant funds is we're going to ensure that our libraries K through 5 and a little bit K through 8 are fully stocked so that our students have the opportunity to really delve into literature and nonfiction. That's one of the changes we're going to talk about in a minute. So again, the teachers determine how to instruct the students. This is not the Common Core dictating that. It's the teachers collaborating to ensure that they have good instructional strategies. Finally, we are not going to be using one single measurement for determining our students' progress. That would be bad, okay? It would be like saying you only get one chance at your driver's license for your entire life and that's it, okay? We're going to be using multiple measures along the way, and we ensure that we're going to pre-test kids. We want to know where kids are when they walk in the door in September. Where are they in terms of reading? Where are they in terms of math? So we know, then we can say, okay, well, we need to get this far by the end of the year. And by the way, along the way, we're going to check in. We're going to make sure along the way that you're still making progress. Well, if you're not making progress, then what are you doing to help that student or this group of students? So we're not using one assessment. And we call those formative assessments. It's for information, formative. Typically shorter, it could be 5 minutes. It could be a quick check-in. You know, if you're an 11th grade teacher, it could be an exit slip on that concept for that day. So now I have a quick slip that I can check and see where my students are, and if I need to, I can adjust instruction tomorrow. Excuse me. So what is our position on the Common Core? We believe that high standards for all is a good thing, and for all means not just Vernon, not just one building, not just one classroom, but for the state and for other states. We're going to set one bar, and so we're all going to be able to try to move in that direction towards that one bar. We believe that high standards is a good thing for all students. We like them because they're clearly aligned, K through 12. There's a lot of time that's spent ensuring that the skills you're learning in kindergarten helps you take those stairs up to 12th grade. It's not just, you know, this group made 7th grade, this group made 6th grade. They don't really correspond. The skills build on each other, so you get up to, by 12th grade, you have reached the highest pinnacle of those standards. Themes. Now, they've centered them around specific themes, and that's just the way they call them claims sometimes. But there's big ideas that are common all grades. So again, it's ensuring that there's consistency as you go from grade to grade. One of the most important things is the nonfiction. Now again, I've heard some criticism that you're eliminating Macbeth, and you're eliminating reading great works of American literature. That is not the case. What we've done, we acknowledge, and we know this as educators, that if we only do fiction pre-K through 5th grade, then when students get to 6th grade and are exposed to a lot more nonfiction, because they're circulating now to in this wonderful building, they're now going to their science class, they're going to their social studies class, and they're going to their world language class, and they're going to these classes. Now they're exposed to all this nonfiction information, and it keeps ramping up by the time they get to senior year, that if we don't have those foundational skills starting in kindergarten, that we're doing them a disservice. So the recommendation at this level, the K through 5, is a 50-50 split. And at the high school level, it's a 70-30 split. 70% nonfiction, 30% fiction. And you'll hear people cry, well, wait a second, I'm in my English class, that means I'm going to have to study the Gettysburg Address instead of Macbeth. Well, that's not accurate. Reality is 30%, it's 100% of their day. So they're already getting 70% of nonfiction in their social studies class, in their math class, in their world language class. Might be some fiction in the world language class as well, and their science class. You can still, as an English teacher, teach fiction, good fiction that we should all know. So that's one of, I'm not, again, trying to demystify things, but that's one of the things that I've heard. And finally, one of the nice things, not finally, there's another slide. is that we're connecting the reading to the writing. So I'll give you an example. What does that mean? I was in a 5th grade classroom the other day, and the teacher was talking about, they were reading an article about, they were actually reading 2 articles about Michelle Obama would like to ban chocolate milk in schools because they're equating it to soda. Well, they read those articles, and the teacher, I was observing this, was saying, well, you know, immediate kids are like, what? Chocolate milk? No way. But they were starting to form their opinion, but then she said, make sure you read the con side, make sure you read the opposing side to develop your opinion. Now find evidence to support your opinion. And then what they did is they wrote about it. So they did their reader's workshop for 45 minutes, they went through the process of deconstructing those 2 articles, forming opinions, taking notes, highlighting, you know, and really deconstructing those pieces. And then they used that evidence in their writing. So it's a direct correlation, a direct connection. Similar to the language arts, we have themes in math that articulate all the way up K through 12. We have, one of the nice things now is that, again, being a social studies teacher, now it's not just, okay, you got language arts standards and math standards. It's not just language arts and math teachers. You got science, you got social studies, world language. I was in a high school in my last district where they were doing writing across the curriculum. That means all areas did some writing, including, you know, PE, art, etc. There was writing. I believe we're doing something similar to that, like that at our 2 secondary schools as well. And I want you to remember that we're not going to take these just as they are. We're going to continually monitor them. We're going to look at them. We're going to adjust them. We're going to put them in our curriculum, and we're going to use them as best as possible for our students. And we're going to continue to review them. I don't anticipate that the first version come out is going to be it for the next 10 years. All standards and our curriculum as well will be continually reviewed, and we're going to update it as needed. Excuse me. The second part of the presentation now I'm going to move on to, again, SBAC, which is Smarter Balance Assessment Consortium. Again, we have to go back a little bit to take a look at where we came from. We've had these assessments for years. We've had, your children have been assessed for years. And as I was thinking about this, because we just accept the CMT and CAP, just because we've always been there. So if you have, even if you have older children, you know, just graduated, the CMT came in 1985. So you're just, yep, oh, 3rd grade, yep, you take the CMT. Yep, 10th grade, yep, you take the CAP. It's just something we've been doing. So we've always had assessments. And what are those assessments? They're summative in nature. And again, remember I talked about formative, along the way, quick check-ins. Summative is that it, that's it. At the end, boom, you get the 1 score, you're done. So it is a summative, and that's supposed to tell you where you are at that time. Remember, right now, actually today, my children is one of the 10% of the districts in the state that are still taking the CMT, and I believe today was math. Now, I won't get those results, and the schools won't get results of those scores. Typically July, recently it's been later, like August. So you can imagine my 4th grader taking a math assessment now, and then being instructed for the next few months, learning more things, and then I get the results in August. You know, they've now progressed past where they were here. So it is good. We want to make sure that we are assessing. Are we testing where our students are? Yes, we want to know that. We want to know their progress. But again, it's here, and then the results took a long time to be graded. I knew that the CAP got sent down to Nashville to be graded. You know, so you got to box them up, send them down there, and they send them back up. It's a one-size-fits-all. That's it. You get the one test. And everyone takes the same test. They progressively get harder, so if it's a series of math questions, the first few multiple choice questions are relatively easy along with the standards, and then eventually they get hard. So by the end, so typically, you know, if you're not familiar with those standards or that content, you'll stop in your assessment and you'll end up sitting there. And one of the rules is, and this was my daughter complaining about last night, is that you have to sit there. You can't even read a book. So you just sit there if you're done. There's only 2 types of questions that are asked. One is what we're now referring to as selected response, which is multiple choice. And then there's an instructed response, which is essentially an essay or a performance. And so it's an essay. So you do some writing, or you do multiple choice. So there's 2 types of, and it's a paper and pencil test. There's no online piece of it. In general, it's 7 to 8 hours of testing. Excuse me, and there's very set dates across the state. In other words, so if you're taking CMT today in math, the state's taking CMT in math. If you're taking the writing in CAP, then everyone's taking the writing in CAP. So it's a very set schedule. The buildings have to establish those schedules early on. There is an alternative an alternative test for MOC students. Now, how does that compare to the SBAC? Some similarities, okay? It is a computerized assessment. That's one of the biggest differences. So it's online. We'll talk about what that impact means for our students. It's adaptive. That's one of the most important differences between a paper and pencil test and these types of tests. Adaptive means we're all in this room, we all take the same test. Let's take it to math test, 6th grade math test. We all get the same first question, same first level of questions. Basically on par, 6th grade, right in the middle. And depending upon what happens, if I get it right, I get a more difficult question. If I get it wrong, I get a less difficult question. And the same thing, if I get that one wrong, I'll go less difficult and less difficult and less difficult. And typically what happens is they'll get down to a level where you start answering some right, some wrong, some right, some wrong, and that's where your level is. Same thing if you go up. Answer a couple right, you keep going up, 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 and then you'll flatline, you'll get to the top, and basically you'll go along that. Unless they get to, there's a little bit of caveat there. They're testing different skills, so they'll start you off again. Let's say you're 10 questions in, you'll get to a new standard, new skill. You'll probably start out in the middle again, and then again go up and down. So it is adaptive. And one of the things that we have to make sure you understand, it's adaptive within the grade. And originally, we thought it was going to be adaptive, so if I'm a 4th grader, but I'm really good, I'm in 8th grade level math, the questions would keep accelerating up to 8th grade. What we're told is that those 4th grade questions could go up to about halfway through 5th grade and down through 3rd grade, about halfway. So it's about a total of a 2-year span. So there are some limitations, but again, it gives us a better picture of where our students are. There's multiple types of questions associated with this. It's not just multiple choice in essay writing. There are those types of questions. But there's other types of questions. I'll give you the quick example. You can have a multiple choice questions where they're asking you to say, which of these answers are correct? You could have 2, you could have 3 correct on that. Okay? We have other type of questions in language arts where you have to highlight text, or you have to move things around with the maps and put them in the correct order. Okay? There's another question that I've seen numerous times. It's a swimming pool with little stick figures, and all of a sudden the figures go across the pool, and they get to the finish line, and there are times there, and they ask you a question about times, the differences between the times, who got there quickly, who got there the slowest. So there's the benefit of having a variety of types of questions. I used to be awesome at multiple choice questions. I loved multiple choice questions. I hated essay questions. So what this does is it allows students with different abilities, different strengths now to perform, show us what they are able to do. And then finally, as I said with the CMT and CAP, it is a summative assessment. That's the end of the road. That's it. You're going to tell us where you are. That's going to give us a benchmark for what you've learned for this year. Some other things that are important with the SBAC. Again, it's on a computer. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the concerns associated with that in a moment. But there are embedded breaks. So I'm not exactly sure how many questions you go through depending upon what grade you're in. But let's say 15 questions in a 4th grade, you'll get a break. You'll get a 2-minute break. You'll stop. You can stretch. There's embedded accommodations. And what does that mean? Accommodations mean making the accessibility of the assessment easier. Give you an example. Everyone has access to a digital calculator and to a dictionary. A highlighter, you can take notes. There's a little notepad, digital notepad. So all of those accommodations are available for all students. There's more technical accommodations for students with disabilities as you get in, but we have to apply for those essentially. One important thing, again, 7 to 8 hours, about the same testing time. The difference is with those hours, there's a very set time with the CMT CAP. You have 90 minutes to complete this is a CAP writing, done. With the SBAC, you can go until you're done, which creates some logistical issues for us as a school system, because if one student's done in 30 minutes and another student's done in an hour, how are we going to get through that? And that's part of the reason we're choosing to go with the SBAC this year, is to work through some of those logistics. The other thing is there's a flexible testing window. There's a 12-week window open in which you can take those tests. So it's opening soon, and then it's going to close down in June. But to fit our schedule, so we know we have an April break coming up, and it's not good to test kids right before break or right after break, well, then let's move it to somewhere else. Okay, we have options in there. If we have technology we need to move from school to school, make sure we have enough, then we can stagger our testing. Okay? And finally, the same thing as the CMT and the CAP, we have an alternative assessment for our neediest students. I'll give you a quick example between the differences between the two tests. This is an old example from the CMT in 4th grade math. And you can see that you're asked to determine, what is 3/7 of the smiley faces? Well, if you've been studying fractions, that's relatively easy because you know it's a base of 7, they're giving you 7. Okay, so you should be shading 3 of those 7. This is a SBAC example. It's a little bit more difficult to read, but it's the same concept. It's fractions, but now you have to understand they're only giving you they're giving you 3 different bases or denominators, if you will, 4, 8, and 2, but they're giving you a scale down that's 1. So the concept here is that you need to understand that 3/7, 1/4, 1/2, 3/8, they're all a fraction of a whole. And so what you would do is, this is one of those examples I talked about, you would take Gregory and you would drag him to where you think he should be on the scale. So you have to click, point, drag, and so it gives you an estimate of where this should be. So it's the same concept, it's just now we're making sure it's not just, you remember, if there's 7 and there's 7 parts or 7 slices of pizza, I'm going to shade in the 3 parts. You have to understand the bigger concept that there is the whole and how those different fractions all relate to each other in 4th grade. 4th grade writing. This is a prompt. This is an actual prompt where you sit down. This is an essay. And they ask you, okay, a gorilla comes in your classroom, sits down. What happens next? And literally you can write anything. The gorilla got a jetpack and flew off to Mars where he had tea with President Lincoln. Okay? You can write that. What they're looking for in this, when they evaluate this assessment, is whether or not you've done the proper conventions, like grammar, punctuation, for instance, whether you have correct order of events, that was important as well, and that you actually were able to write out a full story. 4th grade in Common Core, again, I didn't do the whole thing, it's actually a couple pages, because what you're asked to do here is now you're given a paragraph. Someone else has written this story for the school newspaper of how they think we should have a longer school day. Okay? It's a very short paragraph. I didn't write out the whole thing. It's in the box. So what you need to do now is not just revise the paragraph. You're given a list of a bell schedule for a school that has an extended period of day, extended day. And you're supposed to do is, okay, you're arguing for this. You're given the position of, yes, we want a longer day. Now you're given a document. Take evidence from the document and apply it to this new paragraph and rewrite the paragraph with more evidence. Okay? So it's not just, but you do have to obviously hold on to conventions, grammar, etc. You have to hold in the sequence, logic. But now you have to think, what of this list of, what is important in this bell schedule, and apply your knowledge of what that means into your writing. So it is a key difference there. So, what is it? This is another picture of my daughter. I am shameless, I admit that. But it's a snapshot. Okay? I happen to think this is a beautiful picture of my daughter. It is a snapshot in time. That's what a summative assessment is. Now, if you look at this, she's swinging. So let's say the test is swinging. Okay? How's she doing? We know she's about here, right? She's up there. We can tell she's probably coming down because one of the braids kind of swinging back. So how is her ability? So if she's about here, did she start up here? Is she coming down? Is she going up? So it's a snapshot in time. We have to be careful with that. It's one snapshot. And let's say she's having a bad day and she doesn't really feel like swinging that high. And she takes the swing test. It's going to be not as good as the other days. So we have to remember that it's a snapshot in time. This is not the full picture for our students. Okay? It is associated with our standard. It is that summative assessment. It tells us as a system how we're doing and how our curriculum is doing. Okay? So what it is not the full picture. It's only a snapshot. Okay? It's not the only means for determining our students' success. We are developing assessments along the way. We want to make sure, like I talked about before, the progress monitoring. If we just wait, we just teach our kids and teach and teach and teach and teach, and then we take a test in May, and oh boy, they didn't do that well. That's not really fair to our students, it's not fair to our teachers, it's not fair to you. So we want to make sure that we're monitoring their progress along the way. It's not a formative assessment, as I said. This year, it's not used for individual scores. Okay, so we're not, your individual children taking the assessment will not get an individual score. We're going to get an aggregate, in other words, a sum, where we hope that we're going to get it by building. We're hearing different things about when we're going to get it and what the format of it is, but we're definitely not getting it for individual students. Another key piece, and this is important for us too as a system, is that it's not tied to teacher evaluation. This year, and the formality of that is we had to get a waiver from the federal government, and that was approved to not use the state assessments for that for this year. And we are applying for a waiver for that next year. And we're hopeful that we get that because, again, it would be a matter of fairness, if you will. If it's an untested test, and now we're tying it to a teacher's evaluation, and it's a snapshot in time, then what's going to happen is, as a teacher, I'm going to have high anxiety about that. Because it's the one thing, and it's actually 45% of my overall evaluation. You know, that's one piece. And what we're hopeful, and I'm hopeful, this is my professional and personal opinion, is that we get to more of those formatives, that growth model. Are we showing where our students were in September and what you did as an educator to move them by the end of the year? That would be the ideal. Because the conversations, I'm observing teachers at one of the elementary schools as part of my job. I actually am their formal observer. And I've had rich conversations recently about the progress for their individual students. Because they pre-assessed, they've been instructing them, and we're seeing incredible progress. I did have a conversation with one teacher that said, well, you know, they're supposed to be at this level in reading, but they're down here. And I said, okay, well, what's going on? And they said, well, I'm not sure, so I'm going to work with the reading specialist, and we're going to do this, we're going to do this, and we're going to do this. It was fantastic. You know, if we go to an old model where 85% of our students need to be at goal, what about those 15%? So in an ideal model, what we're looking at all students and ensuring that they're growing. Take a clear picture of where they are and make sure that they grow over the course of the year. So that's a key feature. What is our position? Why did we choose to go to the SBAC this year with 90% of the other districts, not my home district? Because the CMT and the CAPT are no longer aligned to what we're doing. We're spending a lot of time working on curriculum, and we've had a lot of time teachers collaborating on new standards and new instruction and developing formative assessments, and then we're going to do a test that doesn't really relate to that. That didn't make sense to us. It's a low stakes. That's important. You always hear about high stakes testing, high stakes testing. It's low stakes testing. All right? There's no impact on teachers, and there is no impact on the students. As a district, there's no impact on us. As schools, one of the things that we look for is something called the School Performance Index. We didn't get that this year. We're not going to get it next year. We probably won't get it the next year. So as schools, they're not being judged by this new assessment. Okay, so it's low stakes. It gives us a clearer picture of where our students are in relation to the curriculum. We're developing new curriculum. You know, we are working on that. We're working with outside agencies to help us with that. Teachers College in Columbia, they're helping us with that information. So we get a little bit of picture of, okay, so we got this new stuff. How are we doing with that new stuff? Another benefit of having students take it is that they become familiar with it. So they're not just walking into it cold next year when it becomes official. You know, they get a chance to look at it, they get a chance to explore it, they get a chance to experience it, and then we get some feedback. Well, what type of test questions really trip kids up? And then we can make sure that they're familiar with those test questions. One of the things I want to assure you, and I did speak to all the administrators about this, and we make sure that our test coordinators and our teachers know this, that if it's a 3rd grade, 4th grade, 5th grade student, any student really, that's going through these assessments, and you see them really, really frustrated with the assessment, they're not sure where they're clicking, it's okay, it's low stakes. We'll pull them off of that test. We'll pull them off of that computer, get them an opportunity to calm down, give them the opportunity to re-engage with that assessment. We don't want our students, you know, crying, okay? We don't want them crying. We don't want them frustrated with this, but we want to give them an example of this. You know, if you're going in for your driver's test, you wouldn't walk into the driver's test but never actually sitting in the car or turning it on. You know, we want the test drive, so that's what essentially we're looking for, is test driving this assessment. Again, it gives us some benchmarks for our own district. Where are we in terms of technology? Do we have enough? Do we have strong enough systems if we have multiple students taking it at the same time, can we cover that? What, again, as I said, technical skills students are necessary to access the test, not just the content of the test. And one of the big questions, and we did hear this at a board meeting from one of our representatives, is, you know, the fairness of having 11th graders take another test. They took a CAPT in 10th grade, and now they're taking this low stakes test in 11th grade. Well, if they didn't do it, then we would have to do CAP this year, for our 10th grade, and then they would have to take the high-stakes SBAC next year. So one class has to do it, and that's this class. And it's an ideal situation, again, because it's low stakes. It essentially is not going to be reported out individually. One of the things we do have to look at is we currently have policy associating the cap with graduation, and obviously, you know, we're going to have to adjust that in the future. And finally, teacher evaluation, as I already stated, we're hopeful that through the iterative process that the state is going through with the teachers' unions and with the colleges, et cetera, that we're going to end up with an evaluation system that makes sense for everybody, and we get into a growth model for both our teachers and our students, because we know that the highest leverage, the single most important factor in student achievement is a great teacher in front of your kids. And so we're hopeful that the evaluation model will move into that direction rather than going to a penalty type of assessment where it's a single snapshot and then you're going to be, you know, depending upon how your kids do. One of the most important things that we need to talk about is the fact that we have a strategy for improvement here in Vernon. And if you look at this, I don't know if you can see my little red dot, there's curriculum down here. This is where the Common Core lives. Okay? It's depth versus breadth. You know, we don't want a mile wide and an inch deep. It's complex and relevant, and that's where the Common Core lives. What we need to emphasize is this: we are also focused on these other two areas. Student. We want them to be able to understand where they are and set their own goals. This is where I am. Again, those formative assessments, this is where I need to be next week, next month, next year. Utilize the power of peers. We know that collaboration is great. I collaborated on this presentation with numerous colleagues. Okay, I didn't do it in isolation. I learned best with working with my colleagues. The teacher, again, one of the most important factors, know your student. That doesn't mean just, you know, a very important piece of being a good teacher is knowing your kids. You know, how's grandma doing? We want that. We want the rapport. We want teachers to love their kids. But it's also okay, like that mid-year conversation I had, oh, they're not doing that well in reading, so what we can do to help that student? Articulate learning targets. We want kids to know where they're going. It just makes sense. So they know what they're doing today, makes sense for what they're doing tomorrow, at the end of the year, and by the time they get to 12th grade. That's important. And provide feedback and continued opportunities to learn. Again, that summative piece, there is a place for that, but we want to give them formative feedback continuously. And finally, in the middle is the task. So we have teachers working on curriculum. They're collaborating together to create, high-level learning tasks. The final thing that I do need to talk about, and there's a lot of questions centered around this, is the concept of what does the state require in terms of testing. This is the actual legislation from the state. And you can read yourself. It says, each student enrolled in any public school shall annually take a statewide mastery examination. In this case, the identified grades are 3 through 8 and 11. Okay? So that is the state position. We do not have a contrarian position to that. We abide by the state laws. Okay? So again, thank you for your time. I think that was about 45 minutes. So thank you for your attention. At this time, if you do have a question, there's some microphones over here, and I'm going to ask some colleagues to come up and specific to different discipline areas that can help answer your questions, hopefully. There's a microphone over there. Yeah, that's fine right there. Go ahead.
William Nicholson, and you put up the state law, but my daughter's in 2nd grade, and I can assure you she'll be not taking the test next year or throughout the system. I will be opting her out. So what is the plan? Because there is no enforcement mechanism with that state law. So you'll be getting a letter, Dr. Conway. She will not be sitting for it. What are your plans to educate my daughter during that time?
Well, at this time, there's a microphone over there if you want. Yep. Still did.
It's working? Yes, it is. Thank you very much. Mr. Nicholson, we are talking about that. As we say, there is no opt-out, so I know you're using that language. We're not going to use that language. But obviously, if a parent is telling a child not to participate, then we're not going to put a pencil in their hand and paper, hand to paper, etc. So right now we're having those conversations. I do have 8 requests from parents for 8 different children to not participate in the test. Now, we're required to count the child as absent for testing, even though the child is in school, but on the testing report that we send in, the child will just be listed as absent. So that is part of our discussion. We have a testing coordinator and 2 curriculum coordinators here as well as to what do we do. That is going to become an issue. I think Mr. Burt mentioned it a little while ago, because there are going to be, and am I too close to one of these?
From this way.
This way.
Oh, this way? Because they are adaptive, a child may finish in 30 minutes and another child may finish in 45 and another one finish in 60. So that is one of our challenges right now, is what we're going to engage children in, what educationally we're going to engage children in. So we're looking at enrichment activities and pushing children to the next level from where they are. So I don't have a specific answer, but it is on our radar screen and we are talking. We don't want children just sitting there, obviously.
Okay, thank you. And just one more comment on the whole concept of the Common Core, where it's at depth versus breadth. Elementary school in particular, you want breadth. You want a kid exposed to as many topics, ideas, things as possible, not just to drill down on a few limited subjects. Because believe me, when I graduated high school, I still had no idea what I wanted to do. And just, the purpose of education is to get a broad exposure to the world. And without due respect to the fiction, nonfiction, you get more exposure to critical thinking reading fiction than you do nonfiction. Thank you.
Hi. First of all, everything that I've heard before coming to here and then what I saw tonight, I think is fantastic. I mean, this is amazing, getting the standards up higher, and I fully approve of this. Do you mind helping me out? Because the people I talk to, my neighbors, I think are just as supportive. Can you actually be a devil's advocate? And this isn't the plan, I'm being really serious. Can you tell me, at least locally, I mean, I hear national hysteria from Texas, but let's put Texas aside. Locally, what are the issues that you're hearing? And help me understand. I saw the cons on the list, and I was reading it through, but what really is the problems that you're hearing? And what do you think the big problems are going to be, let's say after we get into past the low stakes? I know you're kind of making it sound, I mean, they're going to be high stakes soon, so I don't know if that's what the biggest problem is. We can't just say, oh, they're going to be low stakes next year, so that's not an issue. But what are you hearing? Like, what is the issue in town?
Of course, thank you. Well, town and regional and state and national, my opinion, this is my opinion, I believe that there's such angst over this because of the coupling, if you will, of the standards with the teacher evaluation and the tests with the teacher evaluation. And the second piece was the implementation of this. It was just, there's some criticism associated with this because the federal government had leveraged these standards into the states by promising money, essentially race to the top funds. So if you want race to the top funds, one of the first things you're going to need to do is revamp your teacher evaluation system and revamp your state standards to match the Common Core of state standards. So a lot of folks have issues with that because we have the concept of federalism here in America, where it's a separation of the states and the federal government. There are areas that overlap, there's areas that are concurrent, and there's areas that where the federal government does have the authority to dictate to states. Like a tax, for instance, the federal government tax and Connecticut tax. But Connecticut can't declare war on Spain. So there's definite areas. And so people feel as if this is an encroachment upon the rights of states. So it becomes, I think it's a political issue in that regard.
Do you mind if I get, is that really what you're hearing in Connecticut, though? Or is that more of a...
I am beginning, yep.
I haven't heard anyone say that.
I am beginning to hear that. And in terms of, in my own district, the superintendent wrote a letter to the New Haven Register, and he had some criticisms, and mostly it was, let's just take a look at this and make sure that what we're doing is right. One of the criticisms, is, third graders taking computerized tests. We have that same concern. Don't get me wrong. We have that same concern. We want to make sure that these are accessible for students. Are they developmentally appropriate? One of the criticisms I've also heard is the K through 3 standards. Are they too rigorous? Are they ramping up too much? And again, the standards are there. They're not dictated to our teachers. They're used by our teachers. They're interpreted and put into our curriculum for implementation, and they know how best serve their students. So it's not content, it's skills. So I think there's some confusion there, that the content is being dictated. What I'm going to teach as a teacher is being dictated by the federal government, and that's a misconception in my opinion. I double-checked today. I sat down with Mr. Agassi and Mr. Testa, and I said, are these good standards? You know, we've all been in education for a while. We've all dealt with standards. And they said, yes. And I said, well, what about your teachers, your K-5 specifically, because we did a lot of work on that recently. And what would your teachers say? And they said, yeah, they're good. They're rigorous. It's good for students. I'll give you a quick example. Kindergarten, we went from half day to full day, and some folks felt, well, wait a second, they're not going to be able to do these things. We're going to ask them to write. We're going to ask them to read. And we're seeing now, and back in January, I see kids writing. I see kindergartners writing. It's exciting to see that. It's kindergarten writing, so the word, went is W-A-T. But they're still writing sentences in what they think is the appropriate language, and that's exciting for me. And it's exciting for us as teachers. And a lot of teachers that were skeptical said, I don't think they're going to be right. And now they're starting to come around. So there's a lot of facets. And to answer your question and try to narrow it down, I think it's become a political issue because of the implementation and because of the time for the teacher evaluation. I think that's really got what people set off on this. But that's, again, my personal opinion, playing devil's advocate.
Can I ask you a very specific question?
Okay.
The SBAC, is that a uniform national test, or is that tweaked in Connecticut or locally or something?
It's a great question, and I didn't approach that in the presentation. I apologize. There are two consortiums. We are part of the SBAC, and I believe there's 35 states that are part of SBAC. And the other one escaped. PARC, P-A-R-C, is the other consortium developing assessments. Welcome.
I just had a couple of quick things. First of all, I didn't understand your explanation for the 11th graders. My daughter's a 10th grader at the high school and is taking the CAP testing. So
I'm sorry.
Run through that again?
Great question. What I forgot to mention also, see, it's an iterative process, that we still are required by law to do science testing. Okay? So it's 5th grade CMT in science, 8th grade CMT in science, and 10th grade CAPT associated with science. And we are very hopeful that that will change as well, because the CAPT and these new these assessments don't align to the new national science standards that were just created nationally. Currently, our State Board of Education is looking at those, and we're hopeful that they approve them. Again, because what we're seeing is that the old standards, there was a lot of them. And they didn't really correlate to each other, and it was really content-driven rather than critical thinking-driven. And the new science standards, I've had the opportunity to look through them, they really are critical thinking-based, which is nice, and it calms it down a little bit for the teachers. It calms down the content for teachers. We're seeing this as a national movement. I used to be an AP US history teacher, and that was a lot of content. You had to memorize. And then you had 85 multiple choice questions. So you memorized content for 10 months, and then you took 85 multiple choice questions. So now even the AP, the College Board, is now adjusting. The SAT is now getting to more critical thinking. The biology AP test now has gone to more critical thinking. And the AP US history test, I think as of this year, has now gone to more critical thinking rather than memorization.
So will Nona take the test this year and then take another test again next year?
Yes, I misspoke. I apologize for that. Yes.
Okay.
So it's just the one test, though. It should be one test. It's not multiple days of testing, from what I understand.
The CAP test?
Just
Yes.
the science portion, the
Just-
science subtest.
And then SBAC, she'll take the full SBAC next year as well?
Yes, and there's no science portion of the SBAC next year.
Because it's just going to be the math and the
Language arts. That's correct.
Okay. And I know that we won't talk about policy and implementation tonight, but you also work in a cell so much of this, so I'll just spin that a little bit. The too much, too fast, too soon, you wouldn't build a car. You wouldn't ask people assembling cars on an assembly line to build a new car before it was actually planned and developed and they knew what it was going to look like. And I think you were talking about it being political. I think it's not the political frustration. I think parents feel like the teachers are the factory workers on the floor building a car and they don't have a blueprint. And we're all being judged by a blueprint that we haven't finished or come close to. So when you're ready for that cup of coffee, I'll send you an email. And if you'd like a group, we can do that. If you'd like it individually,
Absolutely.
we can do that.
That is a solid criticism of part of the implementation. The only thing that I would respond to say is, again, our teachers are able to look at the standards and translate them, and we're building curriculum slowly. We're trying to do this over the course of time.
I'm probably the proponent of the Common Core that many of my friends or parents of kids I've coached or whoever else might be acquainted are here, but even being a bigger supporter of its ideals, struggle with how it's impacting the whole town, the whole nation, and all that. There's another way to get there. The last thing I would ask, just as informational on the SBAC, if a student tests with us this year and shows up in another school system next year, or tests in Manchester this year and is a Vernon student next year, does that progress follow them through the SBAC, or does they get a unique ID as they go from town to town?
When we actually get those, that's a great question. When we actually get those individual results next year, yes, we will have access. That information should travel. I can't guarantee that. But we do that now with CMT scores and CAP scores. We get those from the sending district as well. And we get their cumulative 5, hopefully if the sending district is organized. But we get all that information as well. So,
thank you.
Thank you.
That's all right.
You can take it out.
How about if I use my outside
I
voice?
think your friend's coming down now.
Okay. That's okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Mr. Burt, you mentioned that students will be, they'll progress through the test to the level that they personally can achieve. But you also mentioned a ceiling to that testing. I hadn't heard that before. I'm wondering if that's a concern, that ceiling will not allow a true representation for some students.
I would say that is a somewhat of a concern, but again, it's that next year. It would be a 4th grade, and if you're taking a 4th grade test, it would be halfway through your 5th grade. What that would indicate to us as a school, as a teacher, that we have to make sure that we're doing those good assessments at the start of the next year, that we really want to make sure we know where those students are. That's why it's important for us to know our students and know exactly where they are. Originally, when we first heard about the SBAC, we were understanding that it would be wide open, but I wonder if it's just logistically impossible for them to really create something like that. So that's a great question. Thank you.
If I may follow up on that, Ms. Arn, that's exactly what we expected, was what Mr. Burt just mentioned. That's what we were told originally, was that the students would continually test until, so that you would get an individual picture that your 3rd grade child who excels in math was doing 7th grade mathematics on these particular standards, and was maybe doing 4th grade in this reading or writing, and that's what we were told when this first started to roll out about 3 or 4 years ago. And this was recent. It was within the last calendar year, maybe even less. That it was October. That we were all of a sudden informed that there was going to be a 2-year ceiling, one above and one below. We are not happy with it. We started to push back. I don't think that's fair to our children. It doesn't open up changing the variable from, or changing the constant from time to learning. And that's what we want all of our students to learn all the standards, and they all learn it at different rates. So thank you for that question, because we are very frustrated over the change.
It really makes the test results that much less valid for every student. Okay. And I wondered if you would consider commenting on your statement that your home district opted out of, you don't want me to use that word, is not participating in SBAC. They're continuing the CMTs, yet Vernon chose to. Do you understand why Vernon did and why your hometown did not?
Yes, first of all, in terms of the validity of the test, I respectfully disagree. I think for a majority of our students, it will give us a clear indication of where they are. It's the exceptional students that we're going to have to pay closer attention to, as well as the students that need additional help that will bottom out. So those are the 2 ranges, and typically if you look at a general, a curve, that would be a very small percentage of our students. So for the majority of our students, I think it's an accurate test and a valid test. So to the second part, do I really understand why the differences between the 2? I thought I laid out the plans there for why we chose to do that, and I do disagree with my superintendent My kids are coming home and they spend time doing these, and they just did the writing prompt, and it was something similar to the gorilla, and I'm just shaking my head. It just didn't make sense to me. So I disagree, but obviously, you know, I'm not in charge of that district. But again, it's about 10% of the district, and then my children are then going to have to take the SBAC next year without actually having experienced it. So, again, as a father, you know, not as a Vernon educator, I was upset with that decision. But it was to be a cynic, if you will, I think it was a politically prudent one for him. And then writing the letter to the newspaper, again, I think it may have been you know, it's a good move for him, politically speaking. Sir.
I'll just leave it down. I just wanted to first of all say thank you for putting this together. I actually think Jordan was one of the folks that asked for this. I'm a parent of a second grader, and I was just curious if you could say where you felt, I guess, second grade in particular, but certainly all of the grades are, as far as curriculum-wise and what Vernon's, you know, children are learning this year. Like, are they going to be ready? Because I got a little bit of a mixed message from our teacher, like, oh, well, we haven't actually switched over to all of that yet. So I was surprised, because I thought that that was already happening. So that's question number one.
Okay, you have more.
Sorry.
So I'll give the broad perspective. When I came into the district, we had very few written curriculum documents, most of them dating back to the 1990s. So we are playing catch up now. That was the main reason I was hired, or my main goal for this year, is to get that curriculum writing. It's difficult work, and it's not easy to do, and you know, I got here in the summer and September, and teachers want to teach. They don't want to sit in August and writing curriculum. It's very difficult to do. But we are aware that we have to start working on this, and we have to start, you know, addressing these issues. So we have been progressing along. We have been developing units. We have been implementing units. I'm going to specifically cite K through 5 in language arts and math. And I have the two curriculum leaders here that can speak more accurately for that. Real quick, just the plan is we just had that curriculum day in February. I now have a clear picture. I actually did an online survey for each curriculum document. One person logged on. I asked very specific questions about the curriculum document and said, where are you in these pieces? And so I now have a clear picture because I didn't have that picture before, to be frank. So now I have a very clear picture across K-12, across all subjects, of where we are in terms of our curriculum. Now, when we have our curriculum writing week, the day after school, knock on wood, it's the 17th. The 4 days there, we're gonna be having teachers come in, groups of teachers come in, and really get the curriculum locked in, ready to roll for September. Done, ready to go, with assessments articulated. So, but let me be perfectly clear. Even when that's done, it's an iterative process. In other words, we keep going through it. We're going to review. Because you build it, you test it, and then you revise it. Okay, so I'll turn it over a little bit to my colleague, Mr. Testa, in the STEM area.
Sure. In math this year, in August, when the teachers came back, we started our first step was really to create math tasks. So every grade level has certain math tasks, which are kind of SBAC-like. We're asking our students to not only solve problems, but to explain their thinking. Last week I met with, for a full day, my K through 2 teachers that are on my leadership team, and we've already we have the first launching unit grade and the first unit for math. Our math curriculum currently is aligned to the Common Core. However, as any curriculum document, we're always in the process of revision. So we're going to have units, we already have units ready for grade 2. We've had teachers that have already piloted them, which is really important to us because we got some really valuable feedback. And our goal next month at our next full day PD day, I'm meeting with K1 and 2 teachers separately, and they're going to have the new units in their hands. So if I have other teachers that are willing to pilot more units this spring, we'll have that opportunity. And as we roll into the fall, we have a specific plan that all of our teachers will have new units more closely aligned to include the standards in the format that the state is kind of, and we've tweaked them. As Mr. Berg has said before, our teachers are really involved in writing that curriculum and really tweaking it to meet our needs to address the standards, but also to include activities that are appropriate for our students.
In the language arts reading and writing area, this is really our first year of full implementation of a Common Core aligned curriculum, which is really exciting because I'm looking forward to next year. We've got these well-articulated documents to work with, guidance for teachers, so we're going to spend time really refining them to meet the needs of Vernon's kids for next year. So it's an exciting time. We're making a lot of progress, making sure that those curriculum units are provided to the teachers prior to the point in time when they need them. Making sure that they're getting a review with the people that actually developed the units, because not every single teacher is developing them. We kind of have select groups of teachers working on and then sharing with everybody else, and then sharing specifically how they can get at it. And then obviously teachers all have a bachelor's degree and a master's, or they're working towards one if they're new. So they have a lot of expertise in instruction, so they're leaning on their prior knowledge, their knowledge of their kids, and using those curriculum documents to do every day in the classroom what is best for Vernon's kids. So it's, we're getting there.
So to sum it up, not all kids are necessarily completely getting Common Core, or I'm still not crystal clear on where we're at.
In math, not to speak for Bob, language arts, yes.
Okay.
And that's what the Common Core
But
is.
you're piloting some of the curriculum as far as the way you're implementing it. Does that sound right? Okay.
Yeah, so some of the revisions, as any curriculum process that you go through, we always want to improve. So this is my first year in this new role. So when I looked at what we currently had, and I see a lot of the resources that are available, some of the states that received Race to the Top funding had other curriculum documents, and the great thing about the standards is we can look at other states, and there's so many more resources available, where we were always in the state of Connecticut trying to develop curriculum based on really on our own knowledge. Now we're looking nationwide, and we can find so many more resources that we can that can be shared with us, and we can kind of tweak them and make them our own. So from that standpoint, it's great. That's one thing that has really helped us as we move forward. So
all in all, you're feeling like when my second graders in third grade next year, we're going to be in good shape. And we'll have we'll be iterating and
yes,
you know what I mean.
Yes, we have a plan. We're sticking to our plan, and yes, I believe so.
I just want to add too that when Justin, Bob, and I worked with the 3rd through 5th grade teachers, we invited them to work with us on the Common Core claims and also to tie it to the SBAC. We had many 2nd grade teachers, and that's a credit to Vernon teachers who voluntarily just attended that session and continue to work on Type to Learn and bringing their kids into the lab to get them ready for the 3rd grade upcoming test. So I think we're in pretty good shape working towards that.
Thank you. My second question, I was trying to figure out, you mentioned the concerns about the 11th graders. And I graduated from Rockville in '95, so I don't remember what goes, what is the impact of these tests? Like, what goes to a college, say? Like, is Vernon sending the whole your whole transcript? Are they going to see 3rd through 5th? Here's their SBAC scores, and what's the what's the impact of these scores? And if they do poorly, like, it's a throwaway, but they got a 30% when they were in 11th grade. You know where I'm kind of going with that.
Thank you for that question, and I don't have a good answer for the new test. I can tell you with the CAPT, most colleges did not look at those scores, especially if you're outside of Connecticut. Those are meaningless, specifically because of the information I talked about earlier in terms of the standards were all over the place, the tests were all over the place, and so you couldn't compare, it's apples and oranges. I cannot give you a clear answer. I'm not sure if college admission boards will now look at the SBAC or the other assessment tests to put that into their formula, typically as they're looking at candidates. But what I am going to do is I will be writing down these questions, and I will do some research and hopefully have something posted by Friday or you can contact me individually. Yeah. So there's my contact information, and I'll do my best to answer. That's a great question. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening.
Good evening. You guys are seeing a lot of me this week, sorry. I have a 4th and 5th grader. So now that you're implementing the Common Core standards now, how are we catching my kids up to the things that they didn't get as of kindergarten?
That is a great question. That is a concern for us. And again, it has to be the progress monitoring. And it's going to be the assessment in moving into the school year. And what essentially that's going to do is going to give us a benchmark in September of where individual students are. And it can't just be students will make 1 year's growth. You can imagine if I'm a student in 3rd grade in reading, and I'm 2 years behind, and every year I'm just making 1 year's growth. Well, guess what happens when I get to 12th grade? I'm still 2 years behind. So we are going to be monitoring, and then we're going to have to make adjustments along the way and do some targeted instruction. The wonderful thing about our teachers now is the different modes in which they're teaching. And we're moving this into the middle school and into the high school. When I was a history teacher, it was stand and deliver, kind of what I'm doing now. And I was engaging the students that way. As I got older and more veteran teacher, I tried different modalities to try to get students engaged. We get into project-based, etc. But we know that as we move students away from that teacher-centered one-size-fits-all, and we really get to know our students through those assessments and those quick check-ins, that we're able to target instruction, especially at the elementary level. You'll notice that when the Reader's Workshop, if students are reading their Just Right books on their level, on level H, there's a bin with level H on it, I'm a student, I go over there, I start reading that book, fiction or nonfiction, both of which have valuable information in them. Then, as those students are doing that, because I've done that quick formative assessment, I can take these 3 students that need some additional help and work with them for 5 minutes. Or we have other staff in the building. We have reading specialists. They can come in and work with those students, specifically targeting that information. But we can also do that up. We talked about, the limitations of the assessment. Well, we don't want to just focus in on students that need additional help. We also want to focus on students who are accelerating. We want to make sure that we're challenging them. So that's the benefits of moving away from, I'm going to stand at a chalkboard and you're all going to do the same thing. So that is a concern for us. It's an excellent question, but we are hopefully going to be through this model of formative assessment adjusting them.
And here's a better example. My son, who's in 5th grade, learned last year, he started doing lattice math. My 4th grader, now in 4th grade, is doing the base 10 stuff from Common Core. So so my 4th grader going up with Common Core will stay with this base 10, but what does my 5th grader do with the lattice stuff that he learned, and how do you do that switchover?
Right, and we had those concerns, when we had the revisions to our standards in 2005, 2009. They shifted things around, they moved them around, they reorganized them, they changed the standards. So every time that happens, we're going to have to readjust. It's similar to, we have students going through kindergarten that are full day K. So their entry level in the 1st grade is going to be different, radically different than the students last year who had half day K. And so we're going to have to adjust instruction there. Again, we have to ensure that we're monitoring our students and we're adjusting instruction in that regard. In terms of the specific content, we are going to be switching over to the Common Core, and a part of that's going to have to be the expertise of our teachers to ensure that they're filling in those areas that need growth for individual students.
One other question. The writing piece of the SBAC test, how is that going to be evaluated? Is that going to humans for evaluation as the CMTs were, or anybody know?
Jan? Yep. That's a good question.
So initially, they're going to try to use artificial intelligence to score the writing. We've had a number of different programs and companies try to do that for the past decade or so and found that they're not very accurate. They're good for syntax, but not semantics. So in other words, conventions, grammar usage, spelling, that type of stuff a computer can do. But the English language is so complex, and the ways in which students use it, especially as they move up through the grades, is so complex that it's you need a human to appropriately assess it. I know that GRE, which is not what this is about, they have a computer score it, and they have a human score. And if those scores are very divergent, they bring in another human to solve the
And
conflict.
I think the GRE is where I heard about the big fiasco of it, that you can't be too far off from the computer model, and they have a lot of that.
Right. So I think what the latest that we've heard out of Smarter Balance is that it's going to be entirely human scored. As a matter of fact, I once a lady at the State Department who I used to work with reached out to me and said, would you be willing to serve on the range finding committee? So I'll be part of a group of teachers nationwide that will get student work, look at it against the rubric that we use to evaluate student writing, and say, this is a good example of a 5, a 4, here's why, and so we'll look at, not me personally, but over the course of a month, thousands and thousands of papers and try to benchmark, here's a good example of a 4, a 5, a 3, a 2, and a 1. And use those examples will be provided to other human beings who will score the tests.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Welcome.
Hi. Just a question on what you referred to, referencing the 11th grade taking the test. Will those individual scores be put on their transcripts? The first time you were mentioning that they weren't going to have individual scores. Are they going to be the first time they take that test put on their transcripts? Or is that another year of follow-up?
So again, 11th graders this year, in all grades this year with the SBEC, there's no individual scores.
Okay.
So for next year's 11th grade, what goes on our transcript locally is up to our high school to determine that. And the requirements of our school, we determine our graduation. The board determines the graduation requirements, so that's part of the process. In terms of reporting out to colleges, it's the same question as before. I don't have, is that going to be a mandate from the state to put this on the transcripts? As of right now, I have not heard that. So I'm not sure if I'm answering your question.
I'm not sure either, because I am getting mixed signals. I have been told that what's on your transcript is state-driven, not school-driven. And I'm referencing the CAP scores, because they're on there today, and I just want to comment, they are being looked at by colleges outside of Connecticut. And I do have a list of colleges if you need them.
Okay.
So my concern is, are we going to continue that, where the scores are posted with this new testing in 11th grade, and I'm not sure when that's going to show up on your transcript. It's going to go out to the colleges.
Again, that's a great question. I'm going to do more research on that and post that answer, or you can contact me.
Okay, and just one more follow-up on the other lady's question. On the written part, are they going to be doing that on the computer also?
Everything is on the computer.
So do we have a concern about the children's
Yes, we do.
computer? Okay,
Absolutely.
okay. All
And we
right.
want to ensure that we have the appropriate technology in our schools, that they're familiar with that, again, the form of the test does not get in the way of their ability. So that is a concern. And it is a concern. Somebody asked me to play devil's advocate. 3rd and 4th grade, is it appropriate for them to keyboard an entry?
Right.
And I'm not an expert in 3rd and 4th grade students, and so I can't give you a good answer for that. What we're going to do is, again, look at what happens with our students now. I do want feedback from teachers in terms of frustration level from our students, if they're getting into writing and they're having difficulty keyboarding. And then, but just as a parent, I know that my kids need to keyboard. They're doing reports all the time. My 4th graders are doing reports. They need to have that skill. I can't recall the last time I wrote something out longhand. I do everything on the computer. So we wouldn't do the skill just for the test. It's a good skill for students to have. We have a program called Type to Learn. It's developmentally appropriate for each grade level, and it gets them into the keyboarding skills. I used to say typing, and apparently that's old.
My last question is, in the codes it mentions the bar in some states is being lowered. Do we have an opinion on where we are going and how many levels?
My little graphic with the hurdles.
Well as listed here.
Yes. Could you read what you have there, just so I make sure I'm accurately?
It says, while the Common Core standard will bring most states into alignment with the same standards, some states that have higher standards will be lowered.
I can only speak for Connecticut standards and from speaking to our curriculum experts, and we feel that is a higher standard than what we currently have for Connecticut.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Thank you. Welcome.
Hi. Just to follow up on something that you already said, you talked about benchmarks. How are you going to determine those benchmarks for those students who tested behind or ahead of the actual SBAC assessments? Or how far it covers?
I can speak specifically to reading. There's assessments that we use currently at all levels. Elementary, it's a Fontes and Pinnell assessment. Middle school, high school, many students will use SRI or Scholastic Reading Inventory, and those are entirely adaptable. So when we talk about the Smarter Balance test only being adaptable within a certain range, that's because of some federal legislation, and basically the state of Connecticut would be out thousands, hundreds of thousands of dollars if we used a test that tested outside of those grade bands, unfortunately. The local assessments that we use test from A to Z, from 0 lexiles to 1,500 lexiles, so that's a very broad range. So we know specifically, as far as reading comprehension goes, where each of our students is at, and therefore can try to appropriately challenge those kids. Like anything else, any skill you're trying to learn, you need appropriate challenge to get to the next level. So not too hard, but not too easy if you're going to make progress. So we have local assessments in place.
It doesn't seem like it's going to be a fair assessment for those who tested above or below.
I'm sorry, I didn't.
It doesn't seem like it's going to be a fair assessment for those who are behind or ahead. You shouldn't have benchmarks for them.
You mean the SBAC?
Yes.
Again, that's going to be the exception to the rule. The majority of our students will be within that's a very wide range, you know, a half a grade up, a half a grade low.
It's concerning to a parent who has a child who's going to test above those.
Right.
So it's concerning to me specifically, I guess, because I have a child who's going to test.
Right.
Above
It's
that, and that's not going to be a fair
it's no different than the CMT. There's limits to what the CMT tests, so that there's no change. Actually, the CMT is strictly within grade level from what, strictly from what,
everything's 10th grade readability levels.
there's no adaptability whatsoever in the current test. So you just everyone gets the same questions, everyone gets the same flat line, and then you get judged on that. This allows for you to really say, okay, if you got this question right, you get another one right, you get another right, then it gives us a clear indication of where the level is, rather than just one or two questions. It really is adaptable to individual students. So I would say for that percentage at the top and at the bottom, you could say that it's a disadvantage, but it's just saying if you're at the top, you're going to be in the 99th percentile, and that's going to be identified on whatever the report is. And 99th percentile indicates, okay, they're probably going to be testing above this. If they're at the bottom percentile, bottom 10%, then that's also indicated. Thank you. Welcome.
Thank you. First question is, are we telling our students that this is essentially a non-counter test this year to kind of help them with some test anxiety, or are we keeping that a secret from them?
We will definitely inform them that, well, we want them to try hard, and the second you say, well, this doesn't count, then, you're going to get a lot of, people clicking through. So what we're going to say is this is a test. We want to see how you do on the test, and we want to see how this district does on the test.
I tend to give our students a little more credit than that. If you explain to them that this is to help everybody involved, I think they'd be willing to do it, but I also don't think it's necessary to provide anxiety to some of our students to try to keep kids from not just clicking through a test. If I think about this then, if 30 some odd states, you said, have adopted the Common Core standards and they're going to be taking the same SBAC testing, is that correct?
Most states have adopted the Common Core. There are some states that are currently debating that in their legislation.
But
the SBAC, specifically that one consortium, it's 35 states are taking that one test. Many of the other states are taking the PARC.
If that many states are signing on to the same type of curriculum and the same type of assessment, then it would make sense that colleges would start looking at that data. So what I'm concerned about is that this year we won't get any student data from this testing. But next year, that could count, and it won't give our teachers a chance to see what the difference is before the scores count for the student. You know what I mean? There should be an extra year lag in there of this not really counting if we're not going to get the student scores for this year. It's not fair to the teachers or the students at that point until we get past 2 years from now.
My response would be for next year, in general, I'm not sure that anybody's going to really take those scores as, those would be a baseline score. Because it is a radically different assessment, the format's different, the standards are higher, it's much more rigorous. So, you know, for instance, a state, I think Washington took, you know, a sample for the state and it was a 30% adjustment from their current standards. So if I'm a college admissions officer and I know that this is a new test and it's brand new and that these students haven't really experienced it and the schools are going through curriculum and the states are having these debates and implementation issues, then it just makes sense that it's just one part of the puzzle. Now, having and being involved with high school students for years and, you know, high pressure district where kids were trying to get into the, you know, top schools, that it's not one thing. It's not the AP, it's not the SAT, it's not your GPA, that it's the whole picture that, you know, we had college admissions officers come and say, so if, you know, if this is part of the transcript, that's just one element. So I would caution anyone really saying that this one piece is going to keep my child out of college. I did that with very, very highly motivated parents and just say, you know, I recommended, you know, if a student wasn't necessarily doing well in my class, take the AP, you know, just take it and get the score because it shows that you had the resiliency to take it and you still report that score, whether the score was great or not. It was a high-level test and it shows that you made some progress in that area. So, you know, it is difficult. You know, I'm sure it's a concern as my daughter gets up into the high school level. Is this going to be reported? Is this going to be the determining factor in their college entrance? Colleges have a wide variety of ways of determining an entrance. You know, it could get down to the fact that they only want to pick, you know, 5 kids from the greater Hartford area, you know, and they're going to pick 1 band leader from all of Connecticut. You know, so if there's 2 band leaders, then I'm sorry, you're out of luck. You know, so there's a lot of number of factors in that. And I share your concern. I understand that. And as I said to the previous folks, that I'm going to look into the reporting of it and the transcript and the requirements from the state. So thank you for your question.
I just want to say one thing about the adaptive testing. When I took the GREs over a decade ago, that was an adaptive test. And the way it was explained back then is the same way it's explained now. That's if you start getting a bunch of questions wrong, they'll get easier until you get back on track, or whatever. That's more dangerous than people give that credit for, because what's easy is subjective to a student. So when I started taking that test, I didn't think any of it in advance, but I started taking the test, and when I see a line of questions that I thought were really easy, I thought I was doing really terribly. But it's because those were the things that, for whatever reason, I was very good at. Trigonometry, recon, that kind of stuff. Geometry, not so good. So when I saw a lot of questions on there that I knew were very easy to me, it made me think that I was doing poorly. So that can be very dangerous, and that can contribute to test anxieties. It's not the be-all, end-all. There are some issues with that as well.
As with any test.
Yes.
Welcome.
Hi, thank you. So I appreciated seeing the comparison of an example of the CMT test to the new testing. And I'm struck by the complexity. And I like it. I think it's good to challenge our students to try to apply, you know, what they've learned in a different way, you know, to really use it, show what they've learned by doing it. I guess it's more of a statement. I guess I'm just shocked at the difference in the amount, like visually, it's just a lot more reading that has to take place to get to the result. So in thinking of that, I guess I had a couple concerns, you know, like, first of all, we talked about those kids who maybe are going to excel and they keep, you know, they keep getting more and more questions. Is there a limit of questions, or is it just when the hour's up, that's it? And knowing that these questions are going to take a little bit longer time, I would imagine you would have fewer questions in this new format.
It depends, again,
Okay.
great statement, I guess, is that depends upon the question format. You know, and they all take the same number of questions. So that is a set. That's why some might finish in 30 minutes, some might finish in 45 minutes, because they all take the same number of questions. And so you think about that selected response, the multiple choice. You know, that's what that's specific to those types of questions. You know, so that's only one part of that assessment. You know, which would create that anxiety. There's other parts. You know, for instance, so just do a quick comparison. The capped writing was originally you read 3 articles, and they were, you know, I believe about 1,200 word articles, and you had a good 30-minute reading period that you would read, and then you would write for 45 minutes to an hour. They changed it to 2 articles, and then you would write for 45 minutes. So it's similar now with the SBAC for 11th grade. They call them performance tasks now, where you are given, an issue. I'll just go back to my 5th grade example, the chocolate milk. And you're given various resources. But with the computer technology, you could watch a video. So let's say I'm a much more of a visual learner than I am a good reader. Now I have this video playing, and I can get more information from that. It could be a poem, it could be, it could be an article. There's a number of different formats. And then during that time, you can take those notes, you can highlight, you can put those together, and then you go in and you actually write the full essay based on your position, pulling in the evidence. But that's something we've been doing for years. The CAP writing is the same thing. You take a position and you must provide evidence to support your answers. We know that's just good writing across the board. That is, what I tried to do tonight. I gave a position with some evidence. That's what all of you are doing when you come up and ask your questions. You say, this is my position, this is my question, and this is my evidence citing behind that. We just know that that's good form for people.
So thank you for talking about the writing part of it. I guess I was more comparing just the example you had up there, and where the second example, the more current, in the current SBAC situation, where, okay, looks like you're trying to find it.
It's not to distract you.
There's a lot of text, and my concern would be for those people who maybe are great at science, or sorry, not science, math, but don't read, has some struggles in reading. I get the feeling they're going to kind of not get a fair assessment on that area.
Actually, that's been a concern for years on any assessment, is the ability to read interferes with the questions, because the CMT has, word problems, has multiple word problems. That are multi-part, that do, you have to pull out the pertinent information. So if you cannot read those questions, you're not going to be accurately answering those questions. So that's been a long time concern, and that's why we know that reading is foundational for every subject. You can't go into a science class without being able to read a lab report, a text, or reading an article on, from NOVA or whatever it is. From science. So that is a concern. So we want to ensure that we have our students really accelerated in reading. That's why we have such an emphasis on reading K through 5.
Right. So looking at the page you just put up, thank you for finding that. Compare it to the one before where it's 7 smiley faces, 1 line question. Right. Yeah.
That's just one example. There's other. This was specific to the fractions concept.
Right.
That was picking one strand and trying to compare those. I can pull out other CMT strands, and there's, we actually, used to work with middle schools, and we used to go through and deconstruct CMT questions and pull out the question strands. In other words, the first 4 or 5 words that would start a question, and then we would write our own questions based on that to ensure that our students were familiar with those strands. So when they presented on the test, they were able to access those. So every test has its limitations, it has its advantages, and it has its tricks that you need to have so you can access the material.
Yeah. Well, again, I just appreciate seeing that. It just struck me how different they are, and I'm curious to see if this results has different. If a student normally in the CMT model was placing at a certain level and now compare it to the SBAC, is there going to be a difference?
Yes, there will.
Yeah.
There absolutely will be, because again, but the rigor of the assessment, you have to look, I guess the statement is, do we accept the CMT as the end-all be-all of really telling us where our students should be in terms of rigor? And I'm more familiar with the CAP, and I can tell you that CAP writing process I talked about before was terrible, in my opinion, as an educator. And I dealt with it for 15 years, and I thought it was horrendous. It just made no sense. And then I won't get into a story, but I found out who was actually reading those down in Nashville, Tennessee. And I was not very happy with the process. And actually, as a curriculum leader in my previous district for social studies, we had the writing prompt as our responsibility in the social studies department. We came up with a formula. It was a very simple formula. It was an outline for students to complete, and our test scores went up because they just followed the formula. It didn't show any real thinking. It just said, can you do this? Can you put this form in the outline? And this is, as I'm reading 30 of these an hour, did you hit all these major points? So like I said, I'm trying to say is that every test, let me go back to one of my big points. This is one assessment. in the career of your children, over the 10 months that we have your children, it's not the end-all be-all. It is a snapshot in time, and we are going to not just judge your children based on this one snapshot in time.
I guess if I would be thinking that an instructor, a teacher, an administrator, whomever, might want to compare what a child has done in the CMTs in previous years, and if there's a vast difference, say the child was strong in math, and now suddenly with the SBAC, whoops, you know, not so great, then there's something else that needs to be identified, worked on outside of this testing system.
Well, that's not going to happen, because we're going to have formative assessments along the way.
Okay.
And we're going to, someone said earlier, what if my child is very high or very low coming into 4th grade because the test doesn't tell you that? Well, we're going to know that within the first few weeks of school, where your child sits. They take the reading assessment, they could be at 11th grade and 3rd grade, according to our reading assessment. So we'll then adapt our instruction to that. So, there's no guarantees in life, and there's no guarantee that we're going to be able to, take the information from the SBAC the first year and really get a clear picture of our students. It's all the other pieces, the expertise of our teachers, knowing their students and knowing exactly where they are. That's what we want to do. This is one snapshot. It's the picture of my daughter on the swing. It's not everything about my daughter. Okay? And we know that as educators. We're telling our teachers that. We're telling our administrators it's one snapshot. And so that's why it's high-stakes testing. And so we're hopeful, the federal government and state doesn't tie everything to this one test. We're an alliance district because of the one test. So we're hopeful that we can use multiple measures across and feel good about what we're doing for our students rather than rely on this one test. I'll give you another example in terms of correlation. Frustrated for years because 10th grade CAP test had absolutely nothing to do with the 8th grade CMT. So you took this test for 3rd grade through 8th grade, and there was correlations there. They had a vertical scale, so you could do some, analysis of that. And I used to get scores to teachers, their reading scores, right before September, even though they were 5 months old, and at least give the teachers some sense of where their kids sat, going into 8th grade. But then it meant nothing for 9th and 10th grade. It just made no sense. You could not correlate. And then when we switched generations, we went from the 3rd generation to the 4th generation of the CMT in 2008, I think. There was no correlation. So if I took the 3rd generation in 3rd grade and then the 4th generation in 4th grade, you were told you really shouldn't make any comparisons. So anytime you have a new assessment, there's going to be issues with the correlation.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. 2008. Sounds good.
I know that you just said that you were using a typing to learn program. Does that program also teach kids how to manipulate the mouse on the computer? Because when this testing first came out, there was a presentation at the Board of Ed meeting where Mrs. Morasso showed how kids had to click and move and be able to manipulate a mouse. What is Vernon doing to ensure that that's happening?
That is absolutely part of our process. We want to make sure that students have access to technology, that we have good labs in all of our schools. Right now, we're not confident that all of our labs in each elementary is fully outfitted with these
I'm not talking about access. Are you actually teaching them how to do those skills? Because if you're not, you're already behind the 8 ball in my opinion, because that's a huge part of this test is being able to utilize and know how to use a computer. So are we teaching kids K2 how to use a computer? I know you're teaching them how to type on it, but are you actually teaching them how to use a computer?
Sure. Thank you. I think, what I've seen in schools is that teachers are taking students to the lab in order to, and then providing them with an activity that will require them to use the mouse. So we're encouraging all our teachers to, whatever they've done in the past, if they've done an activity which is with paper and pencil, to really think hard and work with grade level colleagues to turn that into a digitized activity. So we're hoping that that increases and increase their stamina in terms of using those skills.
And we are planning to ensure that they are exposed to similar, we don't want to teach the test. That's the last message I want to send. But if it's the function of the test, then we're going to make sure we expose them to the idea of clicking and dragging, absolutely. And, is that developmentally appropriate for a kindergartner? I currently have a kindergartner, and she's great on the touchpad, but, the mouse, you got to buy the right size mouse and the thing. So I wouldn't say, are we teaching them in kindergarten? So we have to ensure that's developmentally appropriate. And I'm not going to say, if it's not, just because we want to make sure they're ready in 3rd grade, then we're not going to subject our kids to something that we as a district feel is not appropriate just because the state gives us this test. So we're making sure that what we are doing is what's best for Vernon kids, is the short.
And then I would argue that the 2 writing samples you showed both have great value. They're asking you to write very differently. A writer myself, I would argue that you might find kids who write well on the CMT prompt and kids who do and excel well on the new one. So I hope that we're going to be doing all of those kinds of writing, assess them, whatever you want to call it. And so my final question is has the state come back and told you how it's going to work with CAP as a part of the graduation requirement? Yes? It's still considered a part of graduating.
Yeah,
so what will we be using, or how is that going to operate? How will students be considered graduated from Rockville High School if CAP is no longer being offered?
Right now, you're correct. It is part of the state legislature. I know there are several bills right now that are pending where they're looking at that and trying to just change the language, and it will say state assessment as opposed to CAP. So it will still be tied. We are now looking at our policies here in Vernon, the board's policy committee, to make sure that that all aligns. Right now they're taking it, they're not going to get standards. We've been working with Ms. Vernon at the high school because if our students don't perform at a certain level on the CAP, then they have to take local assessments. And pass those local assessments. And so that will mean most everybody in the current 11th grade is going to be doing that because they won't have an indicator on the SBAC, and possibly the 10th grade, for maybe just this 11th. Depends on what they give us next year.
So you're expecting at the end of this legislative session, they hopefully have a plan in place to replace that?
Exactly. There'll be some relief. I'm guessing it will just be a language relief, a language change.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Hi. My big concern is that I have 3 children who are currently in the public school system. I have a special ed student, I have an advanced child, and I have one that's normal, average, however you want to place her. My special ed student, through the course of his years in the public school system, has gone from, in 3rd grade, below kindergarten reading level, taking CMTs, anxiety-ridden CMTs, failing them, if you want to put it in those terms. He didn't even meet goal for the reading part. He didn't even make goal for the math part because of all of the word problems on the math. He can do math. He is very brilliant orally, but when you place something like that in front of him, that is a full page of words, and he's going to say, I don't know, and I'm just not going to do it. He's made, this year he's in 8th grade, and he's here. And he's made honor roll here. He has made phenomenal progress with his teachers, his team. I credit this school for what they have done with my kid in the 3 years, well, almost 3 years that they've had him. I credit Maple Street School for what they did with him in the years that they had him. It's a marathon with my son. It's not just 1 year and then see how far he's gotten. We have gone steps ahead, and then we have jumped back, and then we've gone ahead. It's been a roller coaster. That's what life is like with a spectrum kid and a kid with learning disabilities all mixed into one, and throw in puberty, of course, too. So my concern is that he's done so well. He's seen success. He's gotten 95s on his tests. He's gotten grades. He's gotten on the EG club. He has had great success this year. And then here comes SBAC, and he's not going to do well on it. And he knows he's not going to do well on it. And you guys, or the SBACs, the state, the government, whoever it is, has put on my kid undue pressure. I don't appreciate that. I don't like the fact that you guys, and I'm not saying you guys personally, but this system is going to undo the progress that has taken years to accomplish. And I consider it accomplishment. He's going into the VOAG program at Rockville High next year. That's huge, huge. And I'm upset that this could possibly undo it, which is why I didn't request it, and no offense to you, I told you, I wrote my letter, my kids are not taking these tests, none of them. I know my 2 younger daughters would pass it with flying colors, but I also know my 5th grader is highly anxiety-ridden because of these tests. She's beyond smart. She's reading at a 7th grade reading level. But she doesn't need these tests for me to know that, for her teachers to know that. Her teachers know where she's at. I know where she's at. I don't need this test to tell me or to tell her teachers where she's at and where we have to go next year and how we can challenge her. We do that. We're in partnership together. The school system, myself, the teachers, we're all in partnership. I don't need this to tell me, to tell my teachers, to tell the school where my kids are, where they need help, where they are excelling, I don't need it, and I don't want it, and I'm not subjecting my kids to that kind of pressure, where they are so anxiety-ridden that they throw up in the morning, or they refuse to get out of bed, or they have stomach aches, or they go and they just write gibberish down because they're so stressed out because they see a full page of words, and my son can't possibly read through them, even though he may know what's going on. He's brilliant in science, and he couldn't do the science assessment. He couldn't pass that. And it doesn't attest to where he is. It's just, he can't do that. And that's unfair that we subject our kids to that. So I guess that's more of a statement than a question, but that's where I'm at. And that's why I didn't request anything to you guys. I simply told you, my kids are not testing. That's the way it is. I'm their mother. It's my choice. Those are my kids. You have them as students. Those are my kids. And I'm doing what's in their best interest. So that's my statement.
Thank you. And I do want to... I do want to celebrate the things that you brought up in terms of the teachers knowing their students and the great things that we've done here in the district to address their needs. That's great news for me. I'm not going to sit here and say, yes, this test is good for everybody and it's the best thing and it's going to give us great insights into everything. That's why I've been saying over and over again that we want to know our kids throughout the course of the year. This is a snapshot, and I'm sorry if there's anxiety. I don't want that anxiety. My kids have been feeling that pressure with the CMT for the past few years. There was, make sure your kid has a good night's sleep and get breakfast. Well, I disagreed with that. I said, no, this is more of a test for the schools than it is for my kids, and I said, just have fun with it. So there's some parenting involved with that, but there's some pressure from the school. So if you're feeling that pressure from us and your children are feeling that pressure from us, then I apologize, and we'll work to address that. We don't want anxiety for our students, and we want them to be successful. And there was so many positive statements in your statement. I'm very pleased by that. I know fantastic things are happening here at Maple Street and in the middle school, and I thank you very much for a lot of those positive statements. And I'm sorry if there's anxiety, and please contact me, and I'd like to hear more about why that anxiety is happening for your children. And I'm sorry, welcome.
Hi, good evening. My name is Denise, and like this mom that just came up, I experience on a daily basis a lot of the same thing that she goes through. But first, I would like to thank the BCMS staff, especially Team Believe, Mr. Giancianti, Mrs. Lee, and Mrs. Hoyt, and Mrs. McDonald, just everybody, Mr. Harrison, Mr. Mango. They have been beyond helpful with Quincy's transition here. I have to be honest, I was beyond petrified, but he was so laid back the whole summer. So I'd like to thank everybody for that. Quincy also is in special education along with my third grader who's at Northeast, and they are absolutely wonderful also. But I really relate to the mom that was just up here, because although Quincy has made a lot of progress, the biggest one is his adjustment to the middle school. He struggles terribly in reading, across the board, but mainly in reading. And I guess my question is, because I really don't understand this, is my son is going to, bring down the test scores. He does every year. And I'm okay with that. And what I mean by that is he does the best that he can. And he's made significant progress, but nowhere where he's supposed to be grade level wise. So it is very anxious for him. It gets him, he can't sleep, he gets all nervous, the whole thing like that. But why would you have a child that is in 6th grade and is only functioning academically on a 1st grade level take these tests when it's mentally exhausting for him, challenging for him, brings down his self-confidence, And honestly, he doesn't even really know how to use a computer that well. So can you just explain to me, and I'm not attacking you, please don't fake that. I just, as a parent, I'm trying to figure out what the educational purpose is in that. Am I making sense?
I think what you're asking is if a student's going to have challenge with the test, and it's not really going to show the tremendous growth that they've made. You know, both the students, we had examples tonight, tremendous growth. Then why have them take it? And the easy answer for me to say is because the state's telling us that all students must be tested. And in turn, and that's not a great answer. That is a very bad answer. And I've never been satisfied with that answer. I had teachers in tears. My last year, they had a student that was, had significant disabilities but didn't qualify. There was another test. It was a skills checklist, essentially, the next level down. But we're only allowed to have a certain percentage of our students take that test in any one school or any one district. So it's only the most cognitively disabled students that are able to take these tests. Everybody else gets lumped into one piece. And it's the same thing if we've already had this conversation. If you're a gifted student, why are you taking this, if you're at 11th grade reading level, why are you taking the 6th grade test? And we don't have good answers for that. I've never been given a good answer from the government, from the state, the legislation. They just say every student must be tested. And I had a teacher in tears because one of her students was forced to take this test. He just sat there for an hour, it was the writing one, and didn't do anything on the paper. So I do not have a good answer for you. I don't think it's appropriate. There should be another level. There should be, for students, there should be some acknowledgement that if students are going to have difficulties, it creates anxiety. I absolutely agree. But we are bound by the law of the land that every student must be tested.
The cognitive test you were just speaking of, the cognitive disabled, what category do you have to fall in for that? Is that something my son would fall into?
I can certainly speak with you right after the meeting and talk with you personally about that. We do have this year, what's wonderful is even if a student is not a specialized student or have other accommodations, we can provide many more supports on this type of a test. Even our regular ed students, if a teacher looks at their performance all through the year and says to the test administrator in the building, that this particular student, we would like to see that he's able to get additional supports, there are options for that. And I have a list that I can show you right after this and talk with you. Now we have, like Mr. Vernon mentioned, there's the skills checklist, and if the student is not on skills checklist, they're taking the SBAC. But if they're taking the skills checklist, we're actually having them participate in another version of the test, which is just to see, okay, what sort of questions can a student handle? And then that should give SBAC a little bit more information when they put this test together for all students for next year. Next year, we've been told that there will be no skills checklist, there'll be no checklist. So, we're getting ready for that. We're trying to help all of our students prepare and increase their stamina with the reading, whether it's with the math. We're really working hard to do that. But I can certainly talk with you right after the meeting.
Thank you.
An example of the accommodation would be text-to-speech. So, depending upon identified students, or if it's a reading difficulty, there is a majority of the tests they're able, that word question can be read to the student. And we're still working through some of the logistics of that. They have an online database which we have to enter in student information, and so Ms. Vijay is working through that process. And it's an ongoing learning process for us as well. Welcome.
Thank you for having us for this session. We appreciate it. And to all the parents, thanks for coming. It shows a lot that you care for the kids of Vernon. My heart just kind of broke when she said that she felt like her son's scores were dragging everybody else down. And I think that's how a lot of parents feel about this testing. The Pearson Corporation stands to make a lot of cash off these tests. Bill Gates put a lot of money into Common Core. And that's kind of disturbing to me, is that there's a lot of corporate influence on the school systems. My concern is, A, is Vernon losing local control over their own schools? Also, how much money are we investing in the technology to do this testing at Pearson's request, because they run this test? How much will that cost us? Are the taxpayers going to have to give that money to computers? versus actual human teachers to interact with our kids. And I think that's a big concern. I mean, I have a middle schooler here doing very well who's a brain cancer survivor, you know, and my son is in first grade at Center Road School. My kids have been through a lot over the past couple years, so I am not opting out of the test. I'm just refusing to have them take the test. It's very stressful, and it's not a measure of how our kids are as a whole human being, and I think I rely more on the 6th grade teachers telling me how my son's doing, the 1st grade teacher and the principal telling me how my son is doing versus just this test itself. So, you know, are we losing control over our schools? It's a big concern across the country. I don't think it's mass hysteria. I think it's because we're seeing this in New York and other districts, and we don't want this corporate takeover to happen to us. We like our local Vernon schools.
I think there was 2 parts to the question. I'm not sure if I remember both of them. So I'm going to talk about the technology first. The state did put out a $10 million grant. We received about $145,000 of that grant, and we're using that to supplement the technology into our schools. In addition, we are using our Alliance grant funds, which is over and above our operating budget, so no cost to taxpayers, as well as to put in, we are planning, one of the thoughts this year, we're still going through the process of doing that, and we've talked about this with the board, would be wireless into the middle school this year, and wireless into the elementary schools next year. And again, that's out of sight of our operating budget. So we were very concerned, and the state acknowledged that, you know, there are plenty of districts. And one of the nice things about Vernon is that we actually have a very robust network. We're one of the districts, and Mr. Picaro said, I believe we're top 5 in the state in terms of our network and our infrastructure and fiber optics and things like that. So we're lucky with that. There's plenty of other districts out there, small districts with very little funds, you know, where 95% of the budget is their education budget. You know, you can imagine a one school district. They are hurting big time, you know, because it's not just the technology in front of you, it's the pipeline that leaves that computer and goes out into the internet. If too many things get into that pipeline, it gets clogged. And those are servers and switchers and things like that. So the things that we have in our budget right now in terms of technology are for other things, like smart boards, for instance, that have no direct impact on testing. Off the top of my head, we're getting some laptops for teachers and things like that. The second part, I think, was a thing I read about often was this idea of corporate takeover. And I hope I presented some of that we look at the standards. You know, and there's some, you know, I read some articles and said that, you know, it was a cabal behind it and created these standards in secret and then, you know, foisted them on us. And again, I'm not presenting, you know, going back to that original 8th grade standard. It's up to you to read everything online and come up to your own conclusion. What I'm going to tell you is that we take what's given to us, the Connecticut frameworks before and the Common Core now, and we're looking at them. And we just don't take them, you know, at face value. We're interpreting them, we're analyzing them, we're including in our teaching, but it's not dictating what we teach. So we're not losing local control over your teacher's interaction with your child. That is not happening. I would not permit that from my role. That is not what I want. The standards are one piece of, you know, our triangle of goodness, as we call it. There's a lot of things, there's a lot of elements, and we know that the teacher is the most important. We're investing next year heavily into teacher development because we know that that's what's going to be crucial for our students to learn. And then eventually we'll work. And behind that is a good principal in the building, you know, so we're investing in our principal's education as well. So I think I answered your questions. Is that not? Okay, thank you. This is called wait time in teaching. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to thank you again for coming out. This is important, and I do appreciate all of your questions. Hopefully you felt that I've answered them honestly, but I am open to, as I said, I'm available, as is the staff that you see here in front of you, as are your building principals, as are your teachers. We are learning together. So the teachers are learning this process. And we are supporting them. We're supporting our building administrators, we're supporting our central office administrators, and we're trying to get through this process. The one thing I want to make sure is that this, you know, separate the two things. We are using the standards. We are using those, and they're good, and we're adapting them to our instruction. The assessment is coming, and we are preparing for it, but it is not the definition of your children, and we will not accept that as a definition of your child. We heard multiple stories tonight of how individual teachers and buildings and teams have monitored the progress of your children and have made great strides. So that's the things we should be celebrating and concentrating on and really emphasizing. And I'm walking away from this evening feeling great because I heard fantastic stories about what our teachers and our staff is doing for your children. And I really appreciate that. So I want to thank everyone, the panel here. I want to thank VCMS for hosting us. Thank you very much. And I want to thank especially all of you for taking the time to come out tonight on this rainy night. And have a wonderful evening. Thank you.